Right now, somewhere in the world, someone is sitting across a table trying to talk someone else into something. A price. A partnership. A favor. And almost every book ever written about negotiation will tell you the same polite, careful advice. Listen more than you talk. Find common ground. Aim for the win-win. But nearly 30 years ago, a brash 40-year-old real estate developer from Queens wrote a book that ignored almost all of that, and it became one of the best-selling business books in American history. The book was Trump, The Art of the Deal, and whatever you think of the man who wrote it, the deal-making playbook inside it is worth picking apart, because it's not really about real estate at all. It's about a handful of repeatable principles, and once you see them, you start noticing them everywhere, in negotiations, in business, even in arguments with your landlord. Let's start with the first one, because it's the loudest. Think big. Trump's basic theory was simple. Most people don't fail because they aim too high and miss. They fail because they aim too low and hit. He believed the size of your ambition was, by itself, a competitive advantage, because most people are so afraid of decision-making and failure that they never even attempt the big swing. So while everyone else negotiated for the modest, reasonable outcome, Trump was already negotiating for something 3 times the size, not because he was certain he'd get it, but because asking for more gave him more room to lose from. You can see this literally in his buildings. When he was deciding how large to make Trump Tower on Fifth Avenue, the math was straightforward in his head. Taller meant more apartments. More apartments meant more money. So he pushed the City Planning Commission until he got approval for a 68-story building, the tallest residential tower in New York City at the time. That's not just architecture, that's the thinking big principle poured into concrete and glass. The second principle is one that sounds almost too obvious to write down, but most people ignore it constantly. Know your market before you fall in love with the product. Trump didn't buy buildings because they were beautiful. He bought them because of location, timing, and what a neighborhood was about to become. The Commodore Hotel he picked up in 1974 is the perfect example. By every visible measure, it was a bad asset. Dark, dingy, and losing money. Most investors would have walked straight past it. But Trump looked past the condition of the building and saw the location, right next to Grand Central Station and the subway lines feeding it. He understood that people don't just buy a hotel room, they buy proximity to where they need to be. So instead of buying a struggling hotel, he was really buying foot traffic that hadn't been monetized yet. After years of negotiation and renovation, and a partnership with Hyatt where Trump built and Hyatt managed, the hotel reopened in September 1980 as the Grand Hyatt, and the room rate jumped from around $20 to $115 a night, running at over 80% occupancy. That's not a renovation story. That's a story about somebody doing their homework on a market before anyone else bothered to. The third principle is where Trump starts sounding less like a flashy showman and more like a disciplined operator, and it might surprise you. He claimed every major decision he made only came after asking a long list of questions and pulling in the opinions of everyone connected to the deal. The image of Trump as a guy who shoots from the hip doesn't really match the version of him in his own book. He describes a week in 1987, right around when he turned 40, and there isn't a single packed calendar of formal meetings. Instead, there's a relentless stream of phone calls, somewhere between 50 and 100 of them a day, most of them short, sharp, and to the point, mixed in with a dozen or so impromptu meetings squeezed between them. He'd leave the office around 6:30, and the calls would just keep going into the evening and through the weekend. That's not chaos. That's a man running an information network through sheer volume of contact, gathering inputs constantly so that when he did make a call, it wasn't a guess, it was a decision built on 100 small conversations nobody else saw happen. Then there's the principle that probably explains more of his public persona than any business strategy could. Promotion isn't optional, it's part of the product. Trump believed that getting people excited about something was just as important as building the thing itself, and he thought it worked better coming directly from him instead of being filtered through a public relations team. He leaned into being bold and controversial, almost on purpose, because he understood something a lot of business owners miss. Press coverage doesn't have to be glowing to be valuable. Even negative stories kept his name circulating, and in his calculation, the benefit of being talked about constantly outweighed the cost of occasionally being talked about badly. But, and this is the part people tend to skip over when they quote him, he was clear that hype alone doesn't close anything. You can generate excitement, you can dominate headlines, but eventually somebody has to walk into the building, the hotel, the casino, and if what's there doesn't match what you promised, the promotion turns against you. His own line on it boils down to this: you can't fool people for long, you need a product that actually delivers. The showmanship was the megaphone. It was never supposed to be the message. Now here's where the lessons get personal, because Trump traces almost all of this back to one place: his father. Fred Trump built rent-controlled housing in New York, in an industry where the profit margins were razor-thin, which forced a very specific kind of discipline onto everything he did. He taught his son that toughness wasn't optional in business, and neither was efficiency, because in a low-margin world, waste is the difference between profit and collapse. One of the clearest lessons passed down was how to negotiate with suppliers, not by threatening them, but by offering something almost as valuable as cash: reliability. Fred Trump would promise suppliers consistent payment and the promise of future work in exchange for lower prices today, essentially trading long-term relationship value for short-term savings. Donald carried that exact strategy with him when he moved out of his father's world of rent-controlled apartments and into the much glitzier world of luxury real estate. The buildings changed. The principle didn't. You can actually watch him apply these lessons step by step if you trace his early career. At 13, he was sent to military school, an environment built entirely around structure and hierarchy, and from there he went on to study business at Wharton. But the real education happened on the job, working alongside his father on a 1,200-unit apartment complex they bought in Cincinnati, Ohio. The complex wasn't performing well, so instead of doing anything dramatic, they did something almost boring: they cleaned it up. Literally. They improved the appearance and the cleanliness of the property until occupancy hit 100%, and then they sold it for a profit. There's a principle hiding inside that quiet little story, one that's easy to miss in a book otherwise filled with skyscrapers and casinos. Sometimes the biggest return on investment isn't a clever financial maneuver. It's just making the thing look like somewhere people actually want to be. Once he moved to Manhattan and started working on bigger projects, a sharper principle starts showing up again and again in his deals: turn weakness into leverage. The Trump Tower land deal on Fifth Avenue was negotiated quietly, almost secretly, before competitors even realized what location was in play. But the clearest example of this principle in action is the casino business. When Hilton Hotels began building a massive casino in Atlantic City to compete directly with Trump's properties, they made an aggressive bet, starting construction before their gaming license was even approved. It backfired. The license was rejected just as construction was nearing completion, leaving Hilton with an enormous, nearly finished building and no legal way to open it. Trump moved in fast, negotiating directly with Hilton's chief executive, Baron Hilton, and picked up the entire facility for $320 million, a price reflecting Hilton's desperation rather than the building's real value. The lesson isn't subtle. When your competitor's plan collapses, you don't wait politely. You make the call before someone else does. The casino business also reveals a people-focused principle that doesn't get talked about enough, because it sounds almost too simple to be a strategy. After taking full ownership of Trump Plaza in 1986, following a partnership breakup with Holiday Inn, he wanted to improve profitability, and his method was 3 steps, almost embarrassingly straightforward. Hire the best people away from your competitors. Pay them more than they were currently earning. Give them performance-based bonuses tied directly to results. It's not innovative. It's not clever. It's just expensive, and that's exactly the point, because Trump's bet was that paying a premium for talent would generate a return larger than the premium itself. It worked. The casino brought in a profit $20 million higher than projected. The lesson buried in that number isn't about casinos. It's about the cost of cheap labor versus the cost of good labor, and which one actually saves you money in the long run. And then there's the principle that might be the most quietly important one in the entire book, because it has almost nothing to do with money and everything to do with timing and public sentiment. In May of 1986, Trump was sitting in his Trump Tower apartment overlooking the Woolman ice skating rink in Central Park, a rink the city had been trying to rebuild for 6 years, spending nearly $13 million along the way without finishing the job. Trump wrote to the mayor with an offer: let him rebuild it in 6 months, and he'd put up the $3 million himself. He was rejected at first. But the letter leaked to the press, and the press, predictably, sided with the guy offering to actually fix something the city couldn't. The backlash forced a public reversal from the mayor's office, and a deal was struck where Trump would only be repaid the $3 million once the project was actually completed, meaning all the risks sat on his side of the table. He checked on the construction daily. The rink was finished in 4 months, $750,000 under budget. That single project distilled almost every principle in the book into one move: think big, use public pressure as leverage, deliver something concrete and visible, and let the results speak louder than any press release could. So what do you actually take from all this, stripped of the skyscrapers and the casinos and the gold-plated branding? Aim higher than feels comfortable, because most people lose by aiming too low. Know the market underneath the product before you fall for the surface. Gather information relentlessly before you commit to a decision. Use promotion to open doors, but never let it replace substance. And when an opponent's plan collapses, move before they recover. None of it is mysterious. None of it requires a fortune to start applying. It's mostly discipline dressed up as boldness, and persistence dressed up as instinct. Trump closed his own book by saying he intended to keep using 2 skills for the rest of his career: overcoming obstacles and getting people to do their best work. Whatever you think about the man who wrote those words, that's not a bad 2-sentence summary of what deal-making actually is. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed the video. See you later.